Hi everyone, this is Grandmaster Eugene Perelshteyn, and welcome to my DVD on the Grand Prix attack in the Sicilian defense. Now, I have played Grand Prix most of my life with very big success, and I highly recommend this opening for everyone. So the Grand Prix starts after e4, c5, knight c3, and here black has many choices, but to give you the main line, for instance, knight c6, f4, g6, knight f3, bishop g7, and bishop b5. Not bishop c4 as also played, but instead bishop to b5. So unlike many other Sicilian openings, especially the open Sicilian, white is faced with a lot of memorization. You have to memorize tons of lines in the Najdorf. Then there is the Scheveningen system that Kasparov used with success. And there is, of course, the super sharp dragon that white has to be well prepared. And I'm not even talking about the Sveshnikov and Paulsen and all those other open Sicilian lines. Instead, I want to show you this Grand Prix attack, where the plans are very basic. You have to know the ideas. Of course, there are some variations you have to know, but once you get the key ideas, you should be able to play this without much effort. So what is the point behind the setup? Well, as you see, white refrains from playing d4 in the near future, because this will lead to open Sicilians, and here white instead is going to play d3 in the future. Also, the key is this bishop on b5. In the right moment, you want to take the knight and ruins black's pawn structure, either with b takes c or d takes c. Black is going to have double pawns and weakened pawn structure. But what's more important is that white, with these pawns e4 and f4, is getting ready to attack on the king side. And I will show you a lot of attacking possibilities where white ends up playing d3, and after castling, queen can come to e1, h4, f5, followed by very quick attack. And if black plays normal moves, black is going to get into a lot of trouble. So I will show you a lot of these different lines, and I will also show you if black tries to stop the Grand Prix with various ideas. But this is the main line, and I will show you the key concept after the move knight to d4. This is highly playable, either at the top level or the club level, and the idea is quite simple. Black has a very nice outpost for the knight, and also black is hitting the bishop. So here I highly recommend the move castle, and yes, black will end up getting our bishop, but that's not the end of the world. After knight takes, as you recall, white's plan is to play d3, eventually try to break open with f5. Look at this pawn structure. The bishop, let's say if the bishop was on a2, would only be on the way. It's not really participating in the attack. Instead, it's the dark square bishop that needs to get opened up. So the key is the c1 bishop and the c1 h6 diagonal. So we're going to take a look what will happen after d6 shortly in other parts, but for now, what if black tries to get super ambitious and plays d5? Really, this is the way to refute this opening, because if black manages to blow open the center, black's bishop pair, this beautiful bishop on g7, and eventually this bishop, will have a pretty dominant control of the board. So after d5, white has to take. Obviously, queen takes loses to a simple fork. Oops, and game's over. But of course, black is not going to do that. Instead, the more tested move is a6. Hitting the knight, knight comes to c3, and now knight to f6. So if white is not careful, and let's say white plays something like d3, then black solves all his opening problems with knight takes pawn. Well, as you see that this is a strong knight, black is hitting the knight on c3, and white will have to resort to passive measures after the move bishop to d2. Really, white cannot hope for any opening advantage. So what to do, the question? Well, here white has a very nice idea at his disposal. This move d4, exclam. This is the move which actually leads to a very cool endgame that was suggested to me by my coach, Roman Djindjikhashvili, and I won one of the beautiful games when I was a junior at the US Junior Championship against a very strong international master, Greg Shahari. So let me show you what happened, how we got to this endgame. So obviously if c takes d, queen takes, this pawn is defended, the knight is pinned, and so white is simply up a pawn. So the critical line is, what if black simply takes on d5? And now d takes c, exclam. Well, you may wonder, can just black take on c3 and ruin white's pawns? So knight takes, and now queen takes d8, very important move, intermezzo to stop black from castling. King takes, and b takes c. So this position is the fundamental, you can say, point if black can try to punish white for playing this Grand Prix setup and giving up the b5 bishop. Because if this position is great for black, then the whole setup is really no good. And initially it does look like this position is pretty bad for white. Just look at these tripled pawns. These are just really weak pawns, you may say. In addition, black has the bishop pair. These beautiful bishops are, playing and covering a lot of squares. So at first, you may say black is just better and this position is no good. But with deeper analysis, you will notice that white also has some very important trumps. Number one is that black's king is stuck in the center. Number two is that with quick play, white can give up the c3 pawn and try to use the weakness of the b6 square to get the bishop to a5. So in the game I played rook b1. So of course bishop takes c3 and rook b1 exclam. So black managed to get the pawn back, but rook b3 is coming up. For now the bishop is tied up defending the b7 pawn, so king c7 makes sense. Rook b3, very important move. Bishop goes pretty much anywhere f6 or g7. In the game, Greg Shahari played bishop to g7. And here the key moment of the game, bishop to d2. This variation is extremely important in this theory, and subsequently there has been a number of games where white won quite nicely, but this game is really the key to illustrate you the point. So bishop a5 check is coming up, and really there is no easy way to stop it. For instance, a5 is going to run into rook b5, and this pawn is just weak. So he played bishop e6, logical move, trying to attack my rook, and now bishop a5 check, exclam. Well, it turns out that black is faced with some difficult decisions. Do you play king to c6 and potentially get your king under attack after I play rook b6 check? Or do you move your king back, let's say king b8, and block your own rook? Well, obviously after king to b8, I can simply move my rook out of danger zone, right? I can just simply drop the rook either to, for instance, a3 or even e3, and eventually mount the bishop on b6. Or I can even play rook b1 and give up the a2 pawn, followed by rook d1, and with the bishop on b6, I have a very simple plan. Double up, so I'm going to play rook d2 and double up, and then play rook d8, which is going to be pretty devastating for black. So basically, black is going to play without the rook on a8, and the position is just difficult. So therefore, after bishop a5 check, in this position, Greg played king to c6. And this is the key position. The question is, can white have enough firepower without the queens to mount an attack? Well, you'll see shortly. Rook b6 check, exclam, driving the king up. You have to take the pawn. King c7 loses to discover check. And of course, king d7 is no good. So after rook b6, king d7 is no good because either rook d1 check or even rook takes b7 check. So king takes c5 has to be played. Knight d2, very important move. The knight is coming to e4, and the king is starting to feel very uncomfortable. So Greg played rook to c8. And now if I play knight e4 check right away, the king comes to d4. I can give this check, king takes knight, bishop takes. It looked promising, but I don't really see a way to checkmate the king. The king can try to escape to f5. So instead, I play a really sneaky move. I know that the king doesn't really have a lot of moves here. I know that black doesn't have any threats. Basically, he's playing without these rooks for now, especially the a8 rook. Rook to d1, exclam. Now, this is the key move that pretty much underscores white's attack. Knight e4 is coming up, and there is really no easy way to play. If black tries to stop it with bishop d5, then c4 exclam, and of course bishop takes, loses to beautiful checkmate, knight to e4 mate. So bishop d4 check wouldn't really help. I can simply move my king out of the way, and the problems are still up in the air with c4 and knight e4, and position is just very difficult to defend. So after rook d1, king d5 was played. This is very dangerous, of course, and at this point black is totally lost. So now white needs to play a few precise moves to finish the game. c4 exclam, king d4. So the question is, do I have any nice discovered checks with my knight? And you know what? I couldn't find any, because if I play knight f3 check, maybe king e4, and then the king is threatening to take the pawn or even run to f5. And knight b3 check, well, same exact problem. The king tries to make a run for it. So it's one of those positions that I have to come up with another good move. Rook to b3 exclam, cutting the retreat of the king. For now, the knight covers these squares. The bishop can come to c3 with check, threatening to win the bishop. And of course, the main idea is, of course, bishop b6, check, and king has no moves. So Greg plays rook c6, stopping the main idea of bishop b6, but bishop c3 is still there. King e3, bishop takes g7, discover check. So white just wins a piece, but king e2 hitting both of these guys. So it looks as though white should be winning, and you are right. You just have to find a few accurate moves to finish off the game. So I played in the game rook to f1. I'm giving up the knight temporarily, but I'm going to go for checkmate. And here black already resigned. Well, if you can find a way to win after king takes d2, it's actually not that hard. You can try to pause the video and figure it out. It's a forced checkmate. And the idea is, of course, you got to drive the king to the back rank. Rook f2 check. Obviously, king d1, king e1 lose to rook b1 mate. So king c1 only move. Now bishop b2 check. Of course, king d1, there is simply mate and 2. Check and mate. And finally, if king b1, then all I have to do is give a very nice discovered check. For instance, I can play bishop d4 check, driving the king, and now bishop e3 check, and now mate, next move. So the game was already lost when the king got to the middle. So let's rewind. And this just shows you how devastating this attack could get. With a few accurate moves, So right here, such as knight d2, and then rook d1, I have every single piece around the enemy's king, and the attack is way too powerful. So the question is, what did black do wrong? So let's go back to this endgame, all the way to the triple pawns. And as I mentioned earlier, this endgame is not that simple. White has a lot of options, attacking possibilities, and one of the key concepts is that pawn being on a6. When white's bishop came to the a5 square, the position was already very difficult. So this is already a very difficult position for black. And as I mentioned, king b8 or king c8, you're basically playing down a rook, and king c6, you get very powerful attack for white. So this is one of the fundamental ways. If black tries to play early d5, you have to know this endgame, and you have to know that white has a very powerful attack. So this kind of game introduces you to the possibilities which are out there in the Grand Prix attack with bishop on b5.